Jay Baba.
Hey, Baba.
And, okay. This is talk 9, and title is called The Idea. And this could be the new idea, or in my case, kind of like the 2004 idea. It's the idea of a process rather than a thing. And just so we know what we're going to do today relative to next week, is today we're going to go over it, where I was 14 years ago. So what that was well, when I was working on my thesis, my advisor, toward the end of the period, he said, well, so tell me your idea, your own idea. Tell me, write it in 10 pages and give it to me. And so I did that, and he said, this is really truly new. We need to develop this. This should be developed. And he wanted the thesis to go in that direction and develop this idea. But I said, I've already spent, I didn't have time. I needed to get out of school, so we finished up the thesis that I was doing. But that was an encouragement. And then a few years later, it took me a lot of thinking after school about the idea to develop. I told him I wanted to publish it as a book on my own, separate, and not as a thesis, because then I could have total control over it. And eventually I did finish that in 2004, graduated in 2001, finished the book, and I left it in his, I gave him a signed copy. This is the book from 2004, and it's been out of print since 2006. And it's a very short book, but I wrote it very quickly when I finally felt like I had the idea clear enough, okay? And I wrote it very fast because I felt like somebody's gonna just guess this idea. It's such an obvious idea. It's like, why hasn't anybody guessed this before? Well, it still hasn't been guessed since then. But the book came out better than I thought. And then I did charts right in 2004, right after writing my, hey Don, hey, right after the book. But these charts, they never made it into the book because I did them in the months afterward, sort of from the book. And we're going to talk about this. It's not important to look closely at those, but that's a sort of a look. It looks complicated, doesn't it? Like a complicated idea. It's a very simple idea, really. And we're going to look at those very slides up here toward the end of this talk. So here we are, process rather than thing. One thing I wanted to go over first is I've said something that's kind of bold, and it will sound kind of, it might raise some eyebrows. I said science cannot tell us what causes anything. Now people go, well, that doesn't make any sense. Isn't that what science does all the time? That's what they do every day. They're always explaining causes. That's what they do. And so I'll explain the sense in which I mean that they don't. So we have a rock. I've got a rock like in the slide. And what we call gravity is when you see me, whenever you see me drop this rock, you will also see it fall. Okay? So it's like a law of perception. Now, let me explain that law. So there's the falling ball. Now, scientists have observed falling rocks for a long time. And this is called Newton's law of universal gravitation, and it's his formula. It's been around a long time. And this is a description of falling objects in any situation. Okay. All right. So that's the description of, mathematically, the way something falls every time. This describes, this is an effect, okay, that we see. We don't know what it's an effect of. Scientists can't say what it's an effect of, so what they do is they give whatever it's an effect of, we give it a name, and we call it gravity, okay? All right. So gravity is the name for whatever it is that's causing that effect. And that's as far as science gets, and that's still the case. We have fancier names now, but it still amounts to that. So that's what I meant, and so now you get that. Science can only name an effect, but of what? Okay, we got that. Science can't explain, only name. Okay. Now, I want to also go back over, because Judy says she gets it now, but last week she told me she wasn't clear at what I had said, and you know, I thought I could do a better job. So even though she feels she gets it, and Jeff got it, I'm going to say it again, because I actually appreciate it when somebody has any, you know, that's what I want. I want that feedback. So I'm going to explain this. This, of course, is the sum of all things. So all the things that there are that possibly to explain. So this isn't just objects like apples, but it's also emotions, okay, and okay, any kind of event, any phenomenon, okay. Phenomenon is something that you can experience. We want to explain all things, so we're going to explain everything in the sense of all things. So this, and now this little thing means that's what we're going to explain. Thank you for laughing. Okay, because I'm not that. Okay, so now, don't I look like my dad in that picture? It's kind of funny. That's from the earlier talk number 5, and I was talking about the Enlightenment, and I was explaining Locke's idea, okay? And Locke had the idea that, well, numbers are the same for everybody, so they can't be in your mind. So they have to be outside the mind. And so he came up with this idea of independent of everybody's mind. They had to exist somehow, somewhere, but then they had to rest in something. So he came up with the substratum. Do you remember that? Okay. By the way, I just drew this to say that the circle idea is basically the same idea as a Venn diagram for people who've had logic and know what Venn diagrams are. But that's not important if you don't, because it's sort of a simplified Venn diagram. It's just one circle. Okay, now remember Locke's substratum, and remember Kant's thing in itself. These, I want to draw these, so can't catch me over here with the camera. Like we already have, so we've got this, and this is an exaggeration, so that I can illustrate something, but you get that the head over there, which you don't need to pull the camera over there, but the head, let's say it's 3 to 5. That's everybody who goes over there and measures it, it's going to find it's 3 to 5. So that's somehow outside of our minds. So he said, well, numbers can't just sort of live in number land. So he came up with the substratum, which is basically where we get the idea of material substance. That's what material substance is. It's a kind of an unknown bugaboo. He himself said he couldn't really articulate what he meant by that, but it's a thing, or stuff, which would be included in the class of all things. Okay. Now, if you remember Kant, and I'm just giving 2 examples so that you get the idea. That's an eye looking over here. Okay. And remember that Kant had these lenses. Okay, the time and space, and then over here he had what he called the thing in itself, this mysterious something that's somehow influxing toward us. It's called influx when it's coming from the outside. It's going, you know, into our mind, and then we're organizing it. Okay, but this thing, he calls it the thing in itself, and I can't remember the German word. It's very relevant. It's also called the noumenon. So phenomenon's what we see, this is what we don't. He didn't know what it was, but it was some kind of stuff. It's the same thing. So we see in both of these cases, our explanation for our experience is a thing. So these would fall, of course, into the sum of all things. So if we look at that slide again. And therefore, we have not accomplished explaining, because we've only added to the sum of all things to explain. Okay, so only add. We haven't subtracted, we've added. Okay, so you got that. So we need another way, and the other way is a process. Okay. Now, obviously, as I've been saying for weeks, the cause of all things cannot be another thing. Even a theoretical thing, like a substratum, the thing in itself, or Higgs boson particle, even if they are real, even if they are real, become part of the what's called the explananda. And the explicanda, two spellings of the same word. Explicanda is the thing you're trying to explain, okay? And such explanations only add to the sum of all things to explain. Therefore, they can never explain all things. It becomes circular, okay? We need another way. So, this basically, now last week I have to correct something. I felt real embarrassed. Last week I started late because I had a technical problem because I'm not used to a PC. You worked on Apple, and I have all that worked out now, but I was very flustered, and I just said some very goofy things, but just one of them I'm embarrassed for any philosopher that was watching. This is Thomas Reid. He was a philosopher at the after Kant, and but he didn't know about Kant. He wasn't responding to Kant, but he was responding to Hume and Berkeley, and he was Scottish. And he was responding to Hume, who was Scottish, and he was responding to Berkeley, who was Irish. And and I said last week he was an amateur philosopher. That's not true. He was a very well-trained philosopher. I was referring, because I had my thoughts scrambled, it was a reference to the person who would be his aficionado after the Enlightenment. And his name was William Hamilton, who had a lot to do with the changing of the definition of the word perception. Now, even he was not an amateur in the sense he was uneducated. He was very educated, went to Oxford. Hamilton, I'm going to explain this in a minute, let me go back. But Hamilton was very amateurish, and he was self-taught. His training at Oxford was in medicine and law. And he kind of took up philosophy as a kind of, he was a baronet, and he kind of took up, but we're going to talk about him in a minute. But that was a mistake. Neither one of them was an amateur philosopher. Both of them had positions and stuff in those days, the way it was. Now remember the Enlightenment? And I called that chapter idealism, okay? And that was the idea of trying to do away with the substratum, and do away with some kind of an object, and just everything be perception. But what happened with all those is they always fell into, well, I'll show you. They talked a lot about, this is why the word perception was changed to just being sense perception. Because I'm going to use it in its original sense from the Enlightenment, its classical sense, and it's from its original root from the Latin. They had the idea that their ideas, they called these ideas. Now what they meant by ideas, they meant anything. They meant your sensations like red and blue and the sound you hear, they're ideas, okay? Because they're in your head. That's what, ideas are in a mind. And then they, because of this, and you only perceive your own ideas. Now, Berkeley, there's a quote from him. He said, what do we perceive besides our own ideas and sensations? So this is what gave, let me just say something about that. My thesis advisor, he had his PhD from Stanford, and he had written on Berkeley, and he had published on Berkeley. And I did my thesis on partially Berkeley. And I brought this up, and I said, well, he says that we only perceive our own ideas. And he said, is that controversial? See, it's actually not controversial. Even to this day. That's why we still have a mind-body problem. We're only, however we're experiencing our experience. I'm not experiencing your experience. I'm not experiencing this metaphysical world that I keep inventing in my theories. I'm experiencing my saying, if you think it's firing in your brain and a bunch of electricity, we still don't escape the problem. You could change the wording of it. You could call it your experience, but it's still, the problem never went away. But these first guys after the Enlightenment ended, well, especially this guy Hamilton, they felt that I have to say what the problem with that was. The problem with them emphasizing that and trying to get rid of these external world is that they ended up in solipsism. That's the idea that it's all in your head. And that's kind of a sort of similar to a lot of New Age ideas today. They're kind of very much like this period of the Enlightenment. And this is Descartes, and who had his idea of the evil demon who was feeding him his thoughts, and then from that we get the movie The Matrix, and we've been going over this for a couple of months. It's called the brain in the vat. So you get solipsism from this way of talking about we only perceive our own ideas. So they felt that they could fix it by changing the words. And this is Hamilton. This guy spent his life preparing and annotating an edition of Thomas Reid's works. And I'm not going to go into Thomas Reid, it's way, way, way too much. But I have his works, and it's a big subject. This is a big subject, but it's not that important for us. They wanted to make a differentiation between sensations, like green and sound, and perception, which of course they couldn't explain. And actually Reid said we seem to have a magical power to, I mean, it's just, this didn't work. But that was the idea, and he taught at Edinburgh, and he had a big influence on the young people of his generation, and this lasted to this day. And that's why when I say perception, you'll hear some people go, well, Chris doesn't understand the meaning of the word perception. I do, better than them. Okay, so here's where he changed to the difference. This is Hamilton. Knife, burn it. Okay, according, I don't need to read that, you got that. He made that differentiation. That didn't solve the problem, but they thought that maybe that would. And it lasted. Okay, so, but we didn't get a word to replace perception. We just lost the word perception. So I got to use it, because it's what I'm going to talk about. It's like we're going back to the Enlightenment before these fools. This is from the now public domain, the 1913 unabridged Webster's Dictionary. This anybody can find online because it's in the public domain. Okay. And I'm not going to read that whole thing, but I'm going to point to the blue. Move which way? Move that. Thank you. It's in the way. So I hope you caught the other stuff. All right. Well, Judy did. All right. So it had to be perception had to mean apprehending material objects. What about memories? What about a vision? What about your thoughts? You can't perceive them. How do you even know you have your memories if you don't perceive your memories? I mean, I look at my mind and I can see an apple right now. I'm not perceiving it. This is ridiculous. But this is what they did. And now you see in the dictionary, this is straight from the dictionary, you see Hamilton all over the place. This is Hamilton promoting his idol, Reid. External world. That's what we've been following for weeks. The mysterious and unproven and problem-provoking other thing that goes into the class of all things. It's the theoretical something external. See, something. Okay. So all that's just so I can say perception. Once upon a time, perceive meant to be aware of. Today, it usually only means, depending on the dictionary, to experience through the senses. The implication being that solves something, which it doesn't. This prevents us from speaking about our memories, our imagination, a vision, our thoughts, all of which we obviously perceive very easily. Here we return to the original use of the word of being aware of anything, including thoughts and memories. So now here's the new idea. What I'm going to be explaining is what I thought 14 years ago, okay, when I wrote The Evolution of Perception. Because I haven't, until recently, I just like set it aside. I was eventually going to rewrite it, make it more clear. I noticed there were a lot of people that didn't understand it. A lot of people liked it. I had a lot of fans. But nobody could really understand it the way I wanted it to be, or very few. Dean Nordquist liked my book. And so I love Dean Nordquist. Okay, he's my friend. So, but I have since then, I disavow a lot of that book from 14 years ago. Some of the arguments were poor, and I would, some of it was wrong. Okay, but I'm going to tell you it as it was, and just show you those charts that I created at the time, because next week you're going to see what I realized in the last 3 or 4 years, where I actually grew a beard and was in seclusion. That's why nobody saw me at the center for 2 years. I was really working every day, and I read a lot. Okay, and I got something big. Otherwise, I wouldn't have called these meetings, because this is where something big came up that goes beyond what I'm going to say today. Okay, so, but that's for next week. The new idea, meaning we posit a process rather than a thing to explain all things. We begin by reframing the question. People have been asking the wrong question since Thales, 2,600 years ago. Been asking the wrong question. They've been looking for the thing that causes. Okay? They've been looking for what causes. But they should have been looking for how do things come about. So we're going to ask how we came to perceive as we do, not what is causing it. That was a mistake. Now, I still stand by that. That's true. And remember Bhabha's title for his movie in the 30s. They had many versions of this, and there was more than one script by this name, but they kept reusing the name How It All Happened, which clearly came from Bhabha. It wasn't what did it. You see, it was how it all happened. So it's kind of good. Note that today we only go as far as I was, okay, I don't know. Today in our talk, we'll only go as far as up to about 2004 in this idea. Okay, so now let's talk about perception as we mean it here. Okay, I'm just going to read this with emphasis. Okay, here's an apple. Got an apple. This side's green. This side's green. This side's red. I perceive the smell, taste, color, and coolness of the apple. Anybody can feel it. It's really cold. I close my eyes and I perceive my memory of this apple, which I do. I perceive in my imagination changing the shape and size of the apple, adding more apples, etc. Okay? Bhabha even talked about that. He said you can imagine a mouse with 1,000 heads. But you got the mouse. Where do you get the mouse? When I go to sleep, I perceive my dream of an apple. Okay, we're just explaining how we're using it in the original sense, where we're sort of recuperating a word. When I attend to my thoughts, I perceive my judgments of the apple. I decide it's a good apple or it's a bad apple. Okay, but I perceive that. It really looks like a bad apple to me. Okay, where somebody else thinks it's a terrific apple. If they're starving. Okay, so I perceive my inner dialogue about the apple. You know, there was a guy and he was stealing bananas from Muhammad, and then they said he went with Gary, who's Anita Middleton, husband, I forget. He was with him, and they went to Bombay or Pune, and the guy couldn't stop talking about bananas. And just banana, and so he went bananas. It's kind of like Muhammad played a little game. But the point is, I could perceive my thoughts about my dialogue. You know, apples. You know, people don't have enough apples. You know, they ought to make apples free because apple a day gives up. Blah, blah, blah. Oh, and then there's one more. I calculate the mass. I perceive the shape, size, weight, and number of apples. I calculate the mass of the apple, and I perceive my calculations that I'm making as I'm making them of the apple. Sensations, memories, imagination, dreams, thoughts, judgments, and measurements, I perceive them all. Anything we can be aware of, taking cognizance of. That's what we mean by perceive. Okay. Now, you hear Bhabha, you hear philosophers, all the way back in time, they'll talk about seeing. But they mean perceiving, okay? Sometimes they mean seeing with eyesight, but a lot of times they mean perception in this broad sense. Okay, so we see our ideas, we see our dreams, we see a vision. Okay, but that a vision could be acoustic. You know, but it's still they appeal to eyesight because it's an ancient tradition of philosophy to use eyesight as paradigm of perception, but they're not being literal all the time that they mean perception. So you'll hear them. No. Some people have asked me about that. These are two ladybugs, and they are perceiving. I wondered when I first saw this if they're perceiving each other, but I decided that they're perceiving a little droplet of water there. And we don't know how they're perceiving that water. It's some kind of experience, though. And that's called an umwelt. okay? This is a German, there's no English word for it. And a philosopher, wonderful guy. He named Wexel, he came up with the Umwelt. That means, he was a biologist. It is the experience of an animal in biology. So each animal has its Umwelt. Like, we don't know how a bat experiences the world, but in some way, that's its Umwelt. We can only speculate the Umwelt of a bat. Oops, let's go back. Okay, now, in perception, there's always the perceiving subject and the perceived object. Subject, object. Something transpires between the subject and its perceived object. That's what we're looking for. Whatever that is that's transpiring. There's not just two things in the room, like two beetles. There's something else going on between them that's transpiring. Some describe this transpiring of whatever's happening as something moving out from the subject, and that's called effluence. Effluence means the projection of a substance. Okay, we're going to look at a picture of that. The Stoics thought that. Okay? And the other is influx. And the modern idea is influx. So like light rays and sounds are influxing. Okay, so there are two ways of looking. This is the Stoic idea of perception. I went over that in Talk 5 a long time ago, and the idea was it was kind of an octopus, and the common sense. This was made of psyche, and it goes. The common sense was in the chest, and then the tentacles, not literally, they were made of psyche. They go out and tap like the blind man's cane, and send signals back, and then it gets interpreted into our experience. That's how they explain experience. That's called effluence. That's literally a substance. Effluence. Superman. We still have the same idea in our imagination of something. This is. It actually says here. I'll read it because it's kind of small. Superman concentrates his X-ray vision, pierces through the room's walls. So it's not actually how X-rays work, but it's funny that we still have that in our thing. And this is the modern idea. But in the brain, which is an influx, and but here, and this we'll have in the end of our theory. We'll see that there's a sense in which this is true. Okay, but there's also a sense in which there's something like this. Okay, here we will look upon perception as an activity, an action, a verb. Remember, it's not a stuff. Perception is the name of the action, and the direction is unimportant. We will use both. The direction is unimportant because it's all just an analogy for us, because we're just talking about perception. If I talk about perception as light, it's just an analogy, okay? That's very common, all right? We're not talking about light like the electromagnetic energy. All right, so as I said, there's the percipient, that's the word for the thing that doing the perceiving. And then there is the percept, and it is the thing being perceived. Those are the technical words. What's going on in between them, we have there as a question mark. That's the perceiving that's going on. Okay? They're not the perceiving, they're objects. Now, this is from medieval philosophy, called scholasticism. In every cognition or distinct act of knowledge, there is the knowing subject, or subject of the act. And there is the object of that cognition or act. Normally, we suppose that there can be no act of perceiving without a subject and object. Then someone said, well, you got to have an object or you can't be perceiving. Or there's got to be something that perceives. Like that's what Descartes thought. And these are things. Subject and object, they're things. Well, we can't have perceiving without things. I say, no, I deny that. That's the thing that no one ever actually tried. And we'll see why. Okay, so here we have the percipient and the percept, and what we're left with and begin with is what's in the middle. All right? And it's mysterious, the action. Now I have to talk about symbols because I'm going to be using some symbols in those charts. And this talk's not going to be that long. We're going to definitely finish on time. These are alchemical symbols. And they're not pictures of things, but they're kind of like pictures of things, but that's not what they are. That doesn't represent moon, 2 moons, even though it's a picture of a moon, it represents silver. So we understand that symbols are representations, they're not pictures. They're representations of ideas. Here we have emoticons, and these represent, as symbols, moods. Okay, so they don't represent people that have the mood, they represent the moods. They look like pictures of people, kind of, but that's not what they're really pictures of, and we all know that. We use them all the time. Now, in the charts that we're going to begin to look, we have a symbol, and it's that, and I hope that looks like an eye looking this way, okay? So, that's just a symbol. That's not a picture of an eye. Something I told Megan when she was 5 years old. And then she really got that. She would repeat it back. She thought that was the coolest thing. It's not an eye. It represents seeing. It's like she really took to it. This is another symbol. This is a symbol for it's supposed to look like a lens, and it represents a way of seeing, a way of perceiving. Okay. Now, last week, remember that Gestalt stuff? We looked at a duck rabbit, and you can see it as a duck, and you can see it as a rabbit. And so that's a way of seeing. We can't deny that that's happening. Remember, we're not looking for stuff. We're looking for events. We're looking for a process. There definitely is a way of seeing. And we even saw it switch. Now it's kind of verbal. It switches, and it changes what we see. So there definitely is something that this is representing that's very mysterious again, okay? This is the representation of how you see, seeing and how you see. We put them together, and they form a single idea, which is the mode of perception. Okay, so this is from last week, the duck rabbit. This is the young lady and the old lady, and this is Jesus in the snow. And through our whatever it is, here represented as a lens, a way of seeing, we see this as Jesus helps to have seen Jesus before. Again, you get the idea. These don't represent objects, obviously. Okay? They represent an action, okay, or a process, an act or process. We are doing away with the subject and object. Those were things. Doing away with them initially. They'll come back. They'll all come back. The brain will come back, and all the light and the energy and all the quantum stuff. It'll all come back. But we're starting like this. This single principle of the act of perceiving in a certain way can explain all things, including the subject and object, and meet all 14 benchmarks that we went over last week. We actually got through that. That was really wonderful that we did that. So because couldn't believe we got through that. Okay, this has never been tried before. We couldn't before Baba, and we'll explain why later. No one has ever thought of this before that we know of. The only difference is I would say mystics were seeing it, but they couldn't communicate it because they didn't have the language. And we'll see that in 2 weeks. We'll see that the mystics were talking about this, but they didn't have, for instance, words from psychology. They didn't have words for evolution. Okay. This is a bear riding a bicycle. Okay? How somebody does something, or how an act is being done, and is not something above and beyond that action. Okay? So it's important to see that that not only is this principle not things, there's not even two anything. Because we're looking for that monism. That was one of the 14 things we talked about. But only one. The manner in which an act is performed is not something above and beyond the act. So if this bear is going fast or he's going slow, that doesn't add any new thing to his riding the bicycle. Okay? We still just have, it's still just riding. And we're talking, forget the bicycle, forget the bear, the riding. We still just have riding. So it doesn't, we got that. So we have perfect simplicity. We have Occam's razor. We have monism, all right? And even though in the diagram it can look like two, because we have to kind of analyze this, this represents a single event. So now we back to Kant. If you remember, Kant, this image was in talk 5 when we were talking about idealism. Kant had the idea that, for instance, time is like a lens. He didn't say time is like a lens, but I asked my Kant professor, who has his PhD from Cambridge, I said, does he mean a lens? And he goes, yes, that's what he means. So Paul's Paul. He's funny. He was younger than me. He was right out of Cambridge. So eye with lens and way of seeing. That's going to be our symbolism. That's like our language. Okay. We're all looking through these lenses, huh? That's sort of like how Kant thought. He thought each individual person had these lenses. We're not going to think that way. We're not going to start that way. That's a mistake that Kant made. Kant almost had it right. But Kant assumed that these lenses were all in the individual person's mind. And so that's why he ended up in solipsism again. The idea it's all in your head. And he was criticized for it. So this ruthlessly. Okay, so I'm going to say something, just one more thing about symbolism, because these are old pictures that we're going to look at. Sometimes I use an eye, and sometimes I use a projector. Okay, the eye is like a camera. Okay, that's a movie camera, and that's a movie projector. You know, one is like effluence, and one is like influx, okay? That will seem strange. It just doesn't feel strange to me, and I want to explain why. You can rock back and forth. It's just they're just analogies. But if you notice, for seeing is partially a projection, partially a gathering of what one is projecting, as we demonstrated last week. Once you project that that's a duck, you see a duck. You project it's a rabbit. So don't you see that it's not just a duck coming at you? There's a two-way interaction going on. Okay, so this has not been noticed. So sometimes you'll see in these early drawing projectors and sometimes cameras, the light is sort of what's important. That's the perception. The other stuff, and this will get more clear next week because when I take this to another level, this is just where I had it. I had it 15 years ago. Okay, so now I'm going to draw on the board, but I need to preface what I'm going to do because I'm going to start to draw how this works, the process that produces all things. Okay, Pythagoras. One person said, I don't know if it's true, but he said that Baba said Pythagoras was on the 4th plane. Who was that? Who said that? Anyway, Pythagoras was like a master in the Greek in Italy, southern Italy, before Plato and Socrates, and he influenced Plato a lot. And he believed that the principles of mathematics were the principles of all things. So we're going to see math in a new way, but understand this isn't new, and it's not unspiritual. Okay, and then the next quote is from the Bible, from the Wisdom of Solomon. But thou hast ordered all things in measure and number and weight. Okay, and then Newton repeated this, and several people have, but these are very prominent. He said God created everything by number, weight, and measure. So there's something, regardless of their opinion, those people's opinion, there's something that's actually provably true. Every physical object and physical event, motion, meaning physical, okay, can be described completely in its physical nature, can be described completely in terms of ratios, geometry, and law. Laws are ratios of time and space that govern motion and change. Okay, so you could reduce down and explain, a guy throwing a ball and the bat hitting the ball and the ball going out of the ballpark, and you could explain that mathematically down to the last detail, even where it's going to hit. You could even determine it. That's how they did rockets. They know where they're going to hit. Math. The only thing you can't reduce to math are the qualities that are purely experiential, like color and how it sounds. and how that feels, how it's actually experienced. But that cannot be described in number. That has to be experienced. If you've never had a headache, I can't tell you with a bunch of numbers. You're going to just have to get a headache. I'll give you that. All right. Now, the other thing to remember before I start is that seeing or perception, remember it's not a thing, and it's definitely not two things. And it can't be divided because it's not that kind of thing. Because it's not a thing at all. It's an act. It can't be, you can't draw a line through it. You can't put a wall between, the left side and the right side. It's indivisible. It's one thing. You're going to find, we're going to see later that Baba is going to reflect that. And we'll see. Okay, so this is the first chart I did after I published my book. Oh, I was going to do it first myself. I was going to do it. Sorry. I want to do it myself because it's more helpful to watch it done rather than see a completed result. Okay, so I'm going to sort of. I originally wrote this to appeal to atheists, unbelievably as it sounds. So today I'm going to maybe I'll just go ahead and tell you what I really think. But we could describe all of this without any reference to God at all. We could be real atheists. We'll end up not being atheists, but you can start out that way. So we have perception. Okay, and am I in a good place? Okay, so we have perception, okay? All right. And that's horrible. The perception is all there is in the beginning. In the beginning, it was just perception. There was no time. There was no space. There was no number. There was no division of any kind. There was no color. There was no sound. There was no subject, no object. Just the seeing. But we'll go deeper into this next week. But let's just go with where I was last week, 15 years ago, because it's good to first get it. But then, I didn't want to tell them that I had the idea of the whim. But I said, by some chance, it's got an idea. And that was time. And Kant was right. Kant got it right. Time doesn't exist. It's a way of perceiving things. You see things temporally. You organize temporally, but you're not organizing anything. Don't put a thing out here. That's his thing in itself. F that. This doesn't solve anything. So initially there's just time, but there's nothing in time yet. But there's the potentiality you can see. Because now we have time. Now we have time to do something else. There's time. The next one was space. Okay? But it followed in a process. It's the next idea. Okay? But it's the next sort of imaginative, formative way of perceiving. Now we see spatially and temporally. Now, laws of nature, like gravity, or all laws of nature that are known to science, are ratios of time and space. Once you have time and space, you have the potentiality for laws. Laws of nature. Okay. Each one. Why does the light go 186,000 miles a second? Because it's a law of how you see light. If you're going to see light, that's how fast you're going to see it go, because it's a law. The laws are laws of perception. They're not laws of things. Things come later. They've sort of been putting the cart before the horse. Now, as I just said, this will be surprising. The human body, or for that matter, the body of a chipmunk or something else, is entirely describable its physical form in terms of laws. In terms of laws. Everything, all the motions it does, its size, everything is describable in laws. So what supervenes upon these laws are bodies. Now, as these bodies evolve, they evolve, even though they are, in a sense, purely mathematical. They evolve the apparatus to add new qualities to the world that's a world of law. And number, which is what Pythagoras said the world is fundamentally number. He didn't go all the way back to the beginning. Now, what kind of qualities did it add? Lenses. Whenever it saw this state of number, it saw it as red. And this one as blue. And this state as this pitch of sound. And that pitch of sound. And so what begins to emerge is the perceived object that it itself is. It sort of becomes the soul, you could say, the individual mind. We're not going to add, and it has added to what was already evolving back here, but had no color or sound. So that is being added, and that is being added by the individual's body. The body is a lens through which you perceive number as qualities. And it's, okay, now we'll go to the board over here, and I express this this way. These are all online. All my charts are online. Just such, so the way I wrote this in 2004 was that the first one was distinction, because time is a form of distinction, and then you had to have time before you, then I had quantum relations. I don't have that anymore. The space, natural laws. The biological form emerges out of the natural laws. Where's my stick? This is more than we need to cover, but first you have reference, then you have meaning. That's in my book, I explained it. And more recently, I've re-explained it. It's a really good idea. These are lenses. The reason we can understand language is because we have linguistic ways of organizing. We interpret that sound or symbol as representing that memory or that object or that abstract, and then those become abstract ideas, and that gives us meaning. And then we finally, in my book I explain it more, we finally get self-awareness, which is full consciousness. When we finally realize we're there. As a philosopher named Heidegger said, when being finds itself in the world at the end of evolution. Okay. So this is what is more than can be covered in a talk. And then we have cultural distinctions. We begin to learn from each other that to look upon, poor people with disdain, and rich people with great respect, whatever. These are cultural lenses, and they supervene and they form a sort of a full mythic shared culture, and the world becomes replete with meaning and purpose, and you have your fully blown psyche, and there's your projected percept, and it has all of it. And that's why you find the numbers in it, and that's why you find the colors in it, and that's why you find that the apple is a good apple or is a bad apple. You find everything in it because it has been, but you haven't added it. You added some of it, but you weren't working by yourself. This is there's only one seer. These are appearance only. They are phenomenal. They feel like they exist separate from this. And they have bodies, so they only see certain amount over. I'm looking over here and you're looking over there. We're basically one person looking at each other having a conversation. We are all this. And I'll first show you where Baba actually says that. We are all one perception. We are all one soul. There are not many souls. There is an infinite potential of souls. Because, but there is, okay, you got that. So now let me go over these quickly because they fill it in a little bit, and we're doing good for time. This is Plato's cave. This from a long time ago. I don't remember what talk. That's Plato's idea that the shadows on the wall, compare that to the chart that I just showed you. I mean, it's not perfect. And note the comparison. This will be more clear later. It's when these are the people in illusion, staring at the screen, okay? And the involutionary processes, the turning around or backing up, and we go back to the source and where we find, okay? So the light, the sun in Plato represents that eye. And I'm going to show that the Neoplatonists after him developed that more, basically almost to what I'm saying when we talk about Plotinus in 2 weeks. So this is the first chart. I did my own version of the intelligence notebooks that were discovered in 1969 in a storage room right 6 months after Baba died. They found these composition books, school composition books from the 1920s, and I didn't like the version. Well, I didn't even, and I wrote my own. So I downloaded all the files, and I did my own, and this is page per page, the original, and that's the first chart on page 1. Now, if you take that chart and we turn it on its side, you see the comparison. All right? That's infinite intelligence on the left. Okay? Am I in the way? Yeah, I probably am. That's infinite intelligence. And this is Jamshed and all the Mandali. And anyway, it's the same thing. I'll show that is true. Now, this is a quote by St. Augustine. Baba said that was one of his favorite Christian saints, besides St. Francis, his second favorite after St. Francis, St. Augustine. St. Augustine said, "We can see all of those things which thou hast made because they are, but they are because thou seest them." So it's basically saying exactly what I just sort of roughly tried to describe. So we were bringing together Pythagoras, St. Augustine, all the saints have been saying this, but they were all getting a piece of the elephant. And that's basically what Baba said. And he said that about the failures of philosophy. Each one has contributed a little bit to I had that quote up there, to the vision of reality. Now, this chart, I'm going to go over these charts. This chart, simply, I use it to show that my idea, at least that time, that this is, the white here represents reality, and this represents illusion or appearance. Okay? The famous overused title, Appearance and Reality. It's been used more than once, because it's kind of always been understood that appearances are not reality. God's eye projecting his own light. And the rest is the illusion. That's the only dualism we sort of have, is sort of the nothing and the everything, or the reality and the shadow, the light and the shadow. This explains what I said before. Time and space are the preconditions for laws. Laws then evolve, and then the body supervenes out of the laws, because that's what the body is, reducible to the laws. Through the body, you experience the subjective world. So here you have all the qualities are evolving, and they're all there. The objective world and the subjective. Remember I said, I think it was last week, that the mistake that has been made in the past by idealists or idealism and some New Age books is that they don't take into account, and Baba talked about it, that there's the subjective and the objective, or the given for everyone, and the personal. So there's the individual mind, and there's the universal. Here I use a projector. As I said, I warned you of that. And then here I just repeat the same thing. We have both our common experience, as I said. That's why we all go over to this head over here. We're going to measure that it's about 4 high by 3 wide. And we're all going to agree. Doesn't matter if I said, well, if we had a ruler from another planet, you do the math, you crunch it, doesn't matter what and you'll get the same ratio. So that's the same. You have common experience and individual experience. Here, we have the primary qualities. I'm repeating myself. The biological form evolves here, and then the secondary qualities arise with the ears, the brain, the nervous system, which are basically they're also, right now, they are mathematical, but they are perceiving that math in terms of qualities through four lenses. Now, there's the universal mind, if we want to talk about that, and this is the individual mind. Cultural lenses that are learned, such as good and bad, beautiful and ugly, that collectively make up the individual psyche. And God's eye projecting its own light is the unity of witness. There's really only one seer. It's really all Baba looking through our eyes. Baba has said that. And I'll show it next week. And there's the accumulated, imaginative, and formative impressions. They're all sanskaras. We'll show you that Baba said that the original wind was a sanskara, was the first sanskara. And then we have the division, and there's diversity here. So you have the unity behind the diversity. And this is the full thing put together. I hope you can fit that in the camera. It's not important that we go over it. It's there. These are all online. They're on Wiki Commons. And this is the last slide I have of pictures before the conclusion. It's just sort of kind of cool. God is projecting the world, and
God's a big projector.
This is one quote from the Intelligence Notebooks, which became Infinite Intelligence, but this is the actual original, edited by me, but very, very lightly edited, but very carefully. And I had a friend in Greece who helped me, Stelios Karavalis. We worked very hard, and we got that done. And this is from my own edition of Intelligence Notebooks, and what the nice thing about mine is, like, page 35 in my book is page 35 in the scans that you can get at the Trust. So you can go compare mine. I don't ask anybody to have faith that Chris is smart or something. You go and find out I'm wrong. But people have found, academics have found, that it's much more likely, a much lighter hand was used than in the current book, where you don't know where it is in the original. So I'm going to just, it's fact. Imagine that a man, I'm not going to read this whole thing, because somebody can see this frame, and they can freeze frame it on YouTube and blow it up and, full size, and they can read it. But I just want to show that his faculty of sight is only one, which means the sight which sees through these 25,000 eyes is only one. That's what I just told you. It is one. And then down here, the faculty of sight, which is the seer. It's not like there's an object that's seeing. So one time I thought God is just perception. That's what I thought 15 years ago. I wrote it in my book. I said, well, I wouldn't really say that, because that sounds kind of Buddhist, and I don't think. And I think God's more than that. Okay, but I haven't figured it out yet. Well, next week I think I know how this works, and it'll be exactly what Baba said. Okay. So the conclusion next week we will show that this has to be true. That's a really big, bold claim, because as I showed you, what are we going to use? Perceptions fails us. Logic just tells us what we already thought. Induction is just based on our memories, and it's iffy. So what are we going to? How are we going to know it was true? It has to be true. We will find out next week. That has to do with the intuition that I mentioned in the whole beginning of this, and I said, wait, next week we'll explain that. And I say it's intuition in a very special sense. It doesn't mean, psychic power, or it means something much more Kantian, much more philosophical. And you don't have to agree with me. I said that at the first talk. If you don't like what I say next week, just go, Chris has a really dumb idea. He's wrong, and that's all you got to do. This intuition scores a doorway, and I'm kind of reflecting on Val's line, but I kind of think it does. I think that it creates a doorway to an understanding of what Baba and the saints have been saying all along that we did not understand. This is where I go much further than where I was 14 years ago. The following week, we will show the words of Baba and the saints and show comparisons, and that will be the end. And there's not going to anymore be, there was going to be another one, but that's it. So there's just two more next week. And next week is the most mind-blowing, I think. And in fact, we'll have one more talk. Will be good, just in case we need a little, if I bleed over it, because I really want to do it next week real well. And well, Jay Baba, thank you.
I have a question.
Oh, you got a question?
Yeah, I totally get that the Sears one. I mean, I understand that because I know, Baba.
Yeah.
But when you presented this to your teacher, did he get that?
No, he didn't ever saw the charts. I hadn't even written my book yet. I wrote him a 10-page paper, and the 10-page paper talked in different language. Okay. I didn't even have the word perception then.
Wow.
I was given that by Sarah Edwards, another professor who read. A lot of people, a dozen professors helped me. Just since you bring it up, let me go to these are stuff from next week, but there's a slide down there. I mean, I haven't finished up. There. These are all the people who helped me with my book. It wasn't alone. Lothar Schaefer is one of the most famous physicists in the world. He's a non-dualist. And he and I were friends. He teaches at the University of Arkansas. He's a distinguished professor of physical chemistry, and he's a quantum physicist. And we had a very long conversation where I read his book, which was called Physics as a Source of Inspiration, and then he read an earlier version of mine, called The Consciocentric Universe. And he gave me some feedback. This man just died. He's the one that held up my thesis. I gave him God Speaks, but to read, and he got furious. So he's no longer. Neeson. This was my thesis advisor. He taught me that that we only have our own ideas. He explained Berkeley to me. He taught me Berkeley. It was really important. This is Chris Hill. He's one of the most famous philosophers of mind in the world. He's Chris Hill, his PhD from Harvard in 1973, MIT, Brown University. He happened to be at Arkansas when I was in Arkansas. All these people were world class. I had 3 professors who had their PhD from Harvard, and 1 from Stanford, 1 from Cambridge. These are not academics, and they all helped me profusely. So he translated my work into Dutch. He's a professor in Indonesia. He's Dutch. He knows Louis van Gasteren. It's his uncle. He grew up with Louis. And we found each other online, and then he got excited about Baba again because he knew about Baba from Louis. And Peter Townsend. And he's still in Indonesia, and we're still in contact. And he translated an earlier version into Dutch, and he sent it all over the world. And he said they're handing it out in the classes, and that did have charts. He said they're handing out in classes in the Caribbean. I don't know, maybe they speak Dutch in the Caribbean. This Coralie Kunst, she is from, is a professor. She's a social psychologist. She's very old now. She was 82, but she helped me profusely to film me explaining the idea, and we were together a lot. This lady was the first lady who interviewed me, Maureen, on television locally, and it was very early. I just finished my book, and I have that on my website. And Stelios Kavais is my great friend He's Greek, he now lives in Uruguay, and he worked, well, he helped me write the intelligence novel, the two of us. He also published Bao's book, While the World Slept. He paid for it, he edited it, he did everything. All I did was get Bao's permission, okay? But he wanted to do something for Baba, so we did that. That was several years ago. The new version that's right now at Shahryar Press, he paid for that and edited it. He just, typos. Look at that. Okay. That's it. So that answers, but pretty much all that, most of this happened after academic years. But this is the guy who told me, he's a philosopher of mind. And seriously, look him up. He's one of the biggest in the world, most published, still publishing. He's the one who told me matter is a theoretical entity. I couldn't believe it, because it came from somebody who would really know it. He's a physicalist, he's a materialist, he's this hardcore atheist materialist, but he said matter is a theoretical entity. So he was a gift from heaven. And other things, he taught me epistemology, logic, philosophy of mind. Okay, J. Bob. J. Bob. Did you get the last part? Good. Thank you for asking that, because then I was embarrassed to show this, and so I was putting it off. But a lot of people knew about this. This is really the first time the Baba lovers are seeing. The other people have seen this for over a decade, and with a lot of enthusiasm. But and then some of them, a lot of them were not Bob lovers. They weren't, obviously. Who was even a Bob lover on there? Stelios. 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 I've never met him. Just, we've exchanged pictures though, and we're like, same with Frank. And Frank is married to an Indonesian woman, and he converted to Islam. He used to teach at the University of Bandung, but now he's somewhere else. It says on there where he is. Okay, well, thank you.
Very good. Yeah.